Well, the first panel launched us on a whole range of topics, including touching on natural gas for transportation, but we're going to focus on that in some depth now. And it's my pleasure to welcome Karen Glotfelty of the Heinz Endowments to moderate the panel. Karen is right here on the end. Karen, put up your hand and wave around. Karen is Senior Program Director for the Environment Program at the Heinz Endowments, and she has held that position since 2000. The Environment Program promotes smart growth, green building, civic design, and sustainable development in southwestern Pennsylvania and across the state of Pennsylvania. Karen led the creation of environmental health focus for the endowments. She spent the early part of her career working in Pennsylvania and Maryland state government on land use and water quality policy and planning issues. She became the first Deputy Secretary for Water Management in the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources under former Governor Robert P. Casey. Subsequently, she held the Maurice Goddard Chair in Forestry and Environmental Resources at Penn State University. We are very fortunate in Pittsburgh to have great foundation strength, as President Cohen mentioned. And among that milieu, we are very fortunate to have a number of foundations led by the Heinz Endowments, very interested in environmental quality of this region. And as a result, we have a real ecosystem here of quite creative and innovative nonprofit organizations doing environmental work. Karen's involved in the mix on all that. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Karen Glotfelty.
Thank you, David, and good morning to all of you. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce to you our terrific panel who are going to be talking to us about the opportunities and challenges of increasing use of natural gas in the transportation sector. Our panel includes representatives of vehicle manufacturers and vehicle systems operators, as well as an official of the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. I'm going to introduce our panelists who are at the table now by name and title. Their biographies are in your materials, so I'm not going to take time away from them by communicating that information to you, which you can read in your packet. First, we'll hear from Ellen McLean, who is interim CEO of the Port Authority of Allegheny County. Then James McCarville, Executive Director of the Port of Pittsburgh Commission. Richard Calling, Manager of Global Gaseous Fuels Technical Resource Center for General Motors. William Chernikoff, Manager, Energy and Environmental Research, Toyota Motor North America, Inc. And finally, Brad Mallory, Executive Deputy Secretary for Administration for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. We, again, will have index cards on which we invite you to write your questions briefly and clearly. And if there is a particular panelist that you'd like to address a question to, please indicate that as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Ellen McLean, CEO of the Port Authority of Allegheny County.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning. I've been asked to talk about our project. We're currently looking at the merits of diversifying our fueling to include natural gas. Currently, we use clean diesel. As you can see from the slide, we have 730 buses, 83 light rail vehicles. We own 2 inclines, and we also support and run Access, which is our transit for disability. Our riders, 220,000 on an average weekday, 65 million annually. We have 4 garages and 1 heavy maintenance shop. We use diesel fuel, clean diesel fuel, I say that with emphasis, 600,000 gallons a month, about approximately 7.2 million gallons yearly. Our current lock-in price average is $3.32 a gallon. We spend $25 million annually. This is our project, and we're in the beginning of a feasibility study on this. Our project has two pieces, well, has multiple pieces, but the critical piece is that we're required to retrofit our garage to accommodate for natural gas. We've looked at it. An initial study showed that our East Liberty garage is the best, but we're also looking at building new. So it would be design, build, operate to see what works best for us. We require building a high compression CNG fueling station. Our buses come in at the end of the night. At East Liberty, 200 come in at the end of the day. They line up, they get washed, they get fueled, they get brake fluids, minor fluids looked, cleaned on the inside, in and out 6 minutes, 200. So it's really important that we're able to do that within the time frame that we currently have. Also, retrofitting our East Liberty garage, it's a 24/7 garage. So how do you do it without jeopardizing operations? We also need to retrofit our north side main maintenance shop. And that's where we do heavy maintenance, engine repair, engine overhaul, painting. And we have to be able to do that with the same safeguards in our operations garage and be able to do it as well as fuel the CNG buses when we're done. We also have to purchase CNG buses, and we have to do that within federal rules. We have to, because we buy our buses with federal dollars. You have to, it's 500,000 miles or 12 years to hold a bus. So in layering this in, we buy on average 60 buses a year. So we estimate year one would be 25 buses, but then after that, it would decline as we're required under Title VI to be that no one garage can have a shorter age than any other. So in other words, all the new buses can't go to East Liberty Garage. We have to distribute them across. I put this up just because I think it's important, perception versus reality. These are our engines. We have 32 hybrids. We use diesel for the other 700, and CNG would be the new look. Now, obviously, you can look at this from ambient air, you can look at it from climate, but the key factor for us is CO, and of course, particulate matter as well. This is from the California Air Resources Board. And I point this out because it's the CO that is causing a lot of the issues around retrofitting. In order to retrofit a garage, and the one that has been chosen, and it's only one because the other one requires taking the roof off and raising it. So that would be an extraordinary cost. But it requires things like at 6 times an hour, a total recirculation of air. It's lowering your lights, it's alarms, the alarm goes off, all bays open, everybody out. So it's an interesting look at how do you do it efficiently, and how do you do it cost effectively. The issues for us are obviously the funding. We can go and get state federal money. We have $3 million right now to build a fueling station. What other monies will we need or can we get? And then what's the private sector? For us, and for me in particular being really the finance, the CFO for the organization, is what's the risk that the public sector is willing to take? What's the long-term risk? Because what if we can lower the cost through grants, and we can seek what the stream, a reliable stream to finance, but how do you do that in a market, as the first panel talked about, where we have both diversity of or pricing that can change over time? So how do you ensure that you're not stuck 10 years out, not able to afford it? In terms of P3, the state passed P3 legislation. We're looking at that to see whether there's anything in that that'll help us. It certainly helps us on a design-build model for RFP, but right now it appears that it doesn't preclude an independent builder from the Separations Act, which we're under, or prevailing wage, which we're under. So right now we're looking at project's feasibility, and we're asking, what is the return on investment? Does it make sense?
Thank you, Ellen. Our next speaker is James McCarville, Executive Director, Port of Pittsburgh Commission.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Carnegie Mellon University, for this opportunity to come and talk. I work for the Port of Pittsburgh Commission, and frankly, I'm going to have a lot more questions than I have answers at this time, but I think that's similar to a lot of you out there. We just think there's an extraordinary opportunity, and we want to see what is the best way we can take advantage of it. This map up here, just generally, and this is courtesy of Consol Energy, but it shows you basically our river system from Pittsburgh to Huntington. And when you look at that system, we're talking about the 5th largest concentration of maritime cargo handling in the nation. And that's a big factor. And especially is noteworthy is the fact that about 3/4 of this traffic stays in this radius. So we have kind of a captive audience to deal with, and we're looking at what we think we can help with. The Port of Pittsburgh does not own any of the vessels that we're going to be talking about. We don't own any stations, but we're looking at a problem we have on our waterways. Even though we are considered the cleanest and cheapest in our mode of transportation, we need to convince the public that it's really worth reinvesting and modernizing this system, and we have to show something new. We have to get cleaner, and we have to get cheaper. That's why we're really interested in this opportunity. There's 2 projects that we've been able to work with Carnegie Mellon University on this. One is we're bringing a wireless broadband project down to the waterways, and that will tie in with the monitoring and later on with the use of the natural gas. But one I want to talk about today is we're going to be doing a feasibility study to create a liquid natural gas corridor for the maritime industry, basically in this footprint right here. And the problem that we ran into was that we have a towing industry that does not know or understand the natural gas industry, and we've got natural gas suppliers, on the other hand, that are not familiar with the towing. They don't know each other. And that's when University Energy Partnerships and Life Cycle Engineering came to us and said, it's a cultural problem that they have to come to understand each other and their expectations out of each other. And they designed for us a really comprehensive feasibility study to include the perspectives of both. The bottom line is that the towing industry would have to make considerable investments to change the configuration of their vessel and other parts of the equipment. And they aren't going to do that unless they think there's a reliable supply. Much on the other side, the suppliers of the cargo would have to make very substantial investments in an infrastructure to make the fuel available. And they aren't going to do that unless the vessel operators are agreeable to making those changes as well. So the chicken and egg question is one that requires a feasibility analysis up front. Can I buy the fuel at a reasonable cost that would justify my investments in the engines, and can I build the infrastructure in a way that I'm going to be able to sell it at a price to get it back? So we are embarking soon on a major feasibility study. We'll be looking at the vessel equipment, inventorying both the types of vessels and the operational patterns to know where they come to where they go to and from. We'll be documenting some of the fuel consumption and emissions factors that will be required to provide the answers we're going to need at the end of the day. We'll be surveying the natural gas suppliers. What are their technologies? What are their existing requirements, costs, and distribution systems? We'll be looking at the regulatory issues and safety concerns, as well as those of the insurance underwriters, to try to develop a big category of what needs to be addressed. We'll identify the site requirements, do an opportunity analysis and a nexus opportunities analysis, because many of the same people that have large towing operations, and some of them come back to the same place every night, they may also have large trucking operations that would be equally suitable to take advantage of something like this. We'll be, as Ellen pointed out, we're going to have to look at traditional as well as non-traditional sources to be able to pull this off and put all of these things into a final report. We hope that a project like this will not only increase the price and environmental advantages that we have on the waterway, but we expect it to expand the supply chain for some of the industries that we heard about and manufacturing in the first part of this, as well as the manufacturing that we do right now. We're going to drive down, hopefully, the cost of doing waterway business, which will be an economic advantage for this part of the nation as we go into further manufacturing. And we hope that will stimulate federal reinvestment to rebuild our locks and dams. So we have a multiple series of objectives we want to accomplish. We're very eager to work. We're very eager to learn some of the answers that we do not know yet, but over the next 18 months we expect to generate some of those answers. And finally, we have one other concern, and we look at it as a business development opportunity as well. Much of the frack water, after it has been used and reused a number of times, we're looking at the barging of this to some of the depository places, which right now look like there are places like Arkansas and Texas, and we're working with the Corps of Engineers, with the U.S. Coast Guard, which monitors the permitting of that vessel transportation, and we hope that we can arrange a solution to it. But part of it is, and I look to groups like Carnegie Mellon University, they lack an environment to make a decision like that, because this is such a new area for all of us. Anyway, that is our story, and we're just very happy to be part of it, and I look forward to hearing the answers from the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, Jim. Be sure that you write your questions on your cards, because I want to have time to pick and choose like Andrew was able to in his panel. Our next speaker will be Richard Calling, Manager of Global Gaseous Fuels Technical Resource Center, General Motors.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for granting us the opportunity to tell a little bit of our story on how we look at natural gas. I'm going to confine, obviously, my dialogue to light duty, what some might argue the heavy side of light duty, and talk a little bit about how we look at this from an overall perspective. If I was given 20 minutes, I'd probably spend 5 minutes on what would typically be 4 slides. So I've kind of put them all in one just to kind of breeze through the message. It's hard to do in 5 minutes. But really what I wanted to set the stage is that when you look at this from an automotive perspective, we're often in the crosshairs of many requirements, continuing to obviously satisfy customer requirements, be driven by many regulatory pressures, as well as ensuring that we have an adequate focus on technical innovation. Globally, we see challenges in both the fuel economy and the CO2 emission targets. And so from a global point of view, managing our portfolio, managing our technology, and deploying of the solutions in these regions becomes a very complex puzzle, to say the least. Diversity, we've heard about this as well. Diversity is part of our strategy. It's not all our eggs in one basket, but making sure we stay tuned to what the markets are looking for and have the products ready at the right time. But as we all know, we've come to be very dependent upon, and the internal combustion engine continues to advance on an ongoing basis. And so as never to lose sight of the fact that the bar keeps getting raised, even on what we think is mature technology. And so to meet some of these global challenges and some of these regional challenges, you're going to see a significant advance to still proceed in the engine, whether it burns gasoline or diesel, which becomes then the foundational footprint for natural gas. Taking a little closer to the United States and looking at it from a light-duty vehicle consideration, from a company, from our fleet customers, from individual consumers, it really is looking at it from a policy framework, a privilege-based framework, fuel-based pricing framework, as well as really looking at the understanding of refueling stations from a proximity point of view, a density, and access, public versus private versus potential home refueling in the future. Certainly the fuel price differential versus gasoline shown, could also be shown relative to diesel, varies and is relatively a patchwork depending on where you look. And so as we look to develop our products, deploy our products, we have to look at the United States really as a microcosm of many markets and many regions and maybe sub-markets within each state as well. What we offer today in the market, and we have been for a couple of years, is a full-size van. This is the commercial part of the presentation, to obviously support putting product in where our fleets are looking for solutions. 3/4 and 1 ton, 2 wheelbases, dedicated, 3 and 4 tank configurations with a 6-liter engine, fully backed and warranted, supported and serviced through our GM dealer network. We've produced over 2,400 units. We're certainly willing and wishing for more. But it is a start. This does represent really a return to our market after being away for some time. We certainly are very happy to be back in this beginning in 2011. Recently, we launched our full-size pickup truck, bi-fuel, CNG. We've got over 1,300 orders. We are building, we are shipping, and this really is the return of CNG in the pickup truck market. This, I think, represents our 3rd generation coming back into this market with product. So we're certainly watching the medium and heavy duty market very closely because we see lots of interest and appetite by our fleet customers in that segment. And so as we watch the medium and heavy duty market, we're positioning ourselves with product on the light duty, or what we call the heavy side of light duty, 2500 series, 3500 series type vehicles. If you look at some of the hurdles of light-duty transportation, I really draw attention to a study that was published last year by the National Petroleum Council, where General Motors and many companies were actively involved in looking at all aspects of different propulsion technologies, including a value stream of natural gas. So there was a good chapter, some 100 pages of light reading, that focuses on the challenges of natural gas in the U.S. transportation sector, both medium and light duty. And out of that comes some interesting pathways and some challenges and opportunities that should focus research, should focus early deployments and demonstrations, and certainly gives a clue of where long-term commercialization can be sustainable. From a technical point of view, as I indicated earlier, as our powertrains become more advanced and more complex, you're seeing a great move to direct injection. Gasoline and diesel technology, right? And so the technology for CNG needs to advance and stay current with that as the bar gets raised. Certainly in energy density, fuel storage on board a vehicle continues to be a challenge, having efficient storage and not occupying too much space. And certainly the vehicle premium outlook, certainly chances, there are opportunities in lots of these technology areas, part of it through economies of scale, part of it through a next generation technology to look at reducing the cost of deployment. But again, I draw your attention to this. There's a wealth of information that can foster a lot more dialogue and thinking. So, at the macro level, it is about compressed natural gas stored on board a vehicle. The more you drive, the more you may want, the closer your duty cycle, your return to base. You could start looking at different levels of storage on board a vehicle, different types of material technologies. Those are all part of the cost and volume and customer satisfaction side of the equation. We wish it was one solution fits all. The reality is fleets are very different. trying to find the sweet spots and manage the complexity given the volumes that we are at this stage of the market is part of the challenge. On the powertrain side, as I indicated, as we've gone used to and been familiar with port injected of fuels into engines, doing CNG is relatively mature technology and can be integrated without too much complexity. But as we head toward the world of direct injection, there is still some invention that needs to occur there. And that is really just trying to illustrate some of the areas that need to continue to advance. You know, in closing, to get it right, it's not just about the technical features of the product. It's really understanding the market and the customer experiences that they have had, they hope to achieve, and they want to maintain. Certainly a lot of public education, not only at the fleet, but at the dealer level, at the consumer level. Policy obviously comes into play. But from a technical point of view, it's always looking for what are some of the advanced features and the new opportunities, the things we haven't thought of yet, that will make this a more rewarding and obviously a profitable solution for all parties concerned. Our motto, it does all begin and end with great products. Without that, it isn't sustainable. So with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Richard. Our next panelist is William Chernikoff, Manager for Energy and Environmental Research, Toyota Motor North America.
Let's make sure I'm close enough. All right, thank you. I guess I'll take my 5 minutes, and rather than just talk, I kind of want to frame this in terms of asking some questions, some of which have been touched on earlier, and I'm sure will hopefully spur some good debate with the panel later. I think when we talk about natural gas, I think the initial assumption is let's talk about CNG, but I think the real question is what is the right pathway and what percentage of fuel base should it comprise? Now, I list a few of the big ones up front, and you see a lot of different characteristics as to when they might come online and be used, but there's a lot of other pathways too, which includes biofuels, since the fertilizer and the production of the biofuel is actually very natural gas intensive. But we really need to think about how we want to use the fuel and what the implications are. So if our objective is energy, there's some issues there. It's not just about shale gas. We're seeing a lot of the gas liquids and shale oil, which is changing the market pull for domestic energy, but also the issue of how that oil is used on the diesel versus gasoline side. And again, don't want to get lost in the details of how much alternative fuel and the exact numbers that we see, but what we collectively see is about 70% of the growth in energy is on the diesel side. And what this says to me, or speaks to me a little bit, is that the real, perhaps, demand is in commercial vehicles and diesel replacement, which has a big implication for manufacturing, particularly in the supply chain and the energy that's needed to support the movement of goods and services in this country. If we're thinking about the environment, there's also some issues there as well that raise some questions. There's some technologies now that are already in the market that perhaps offer some better environmental benefit in terms of tailpipe CO2 and oil savings. But then there's also this issue that's become a bit contentious over the last year or so, and I know the panel afterwards will speak perhaps in greater detail and more expertise on it, on the fugitive emissions. And don't want to get into debate, but other than to say that it's certainly something that needs to be considered. Both where and how we use the fuel, the further upstream we might use the natural gas as a resource, less propensity for leakage, and also the intensity of the natural gas and the quantity that's needed and the efficiency of the use. So the less we use, the less environmental impact. And then there's the relative value. Hopefully people in the back can see this, but I don't think we view natural gas and transportation as in isolation. The commodity has price implications and supply and demand with every other sector, whether it's home use, electricity generation, or as a chemical commodity. And the decisions we make today need to be informed not just on what we see today, but where we think that demand and use is going to be in the future, and understanding what the implications of the delays in the system might be in order to prevent some bad or perhaps ill-advised decision-making. And what that also means in terms of the investments that we as an industry make in terms of standing up infrastructure and investing in other forms of technology, both near and long term, and the learning that we get in terms of volume. And so investments in natural gas, whether it's CNG or some of these other fuel pathways, have a relationship to the other options that I showed on slide 1. And so where do we want to go? Is it a short-term or long-term issue? And how do we drive down the cost of some of the other technologies? I suggest that really we need to take a systems view, which leads us sort of to this ultimate question of, is natural gas a bridge or a destination fuel? And I illustrate here the projection of what California sees in terms of their ZEV mandate. And again, this isn't to suggest that we agree with this projection, but it's really for illustration purposes. And this idea that depending on how we use natural gas, CNG or other, it can hinder or help the growth of some of these long-term objectives. And everyone's value may be different, but we need to be clear about what we want to get to. If it can help, if it's used some pathways, perhaps in low concentrations, to supplement, which will allow us to transition to some of these long-term pathways, natural gas for hydrogen now, renewable pathways for hydrogen later, or address some of our immediate energy concerns with perhaps low percentage of methanol in the fuel today, or gas to liquids until some of these other alternatives come online. Or it can result in lock-in, where the investments we make in infrastructure today preclude the necessary investments we need to make in infrastructure for some of our technologies we want to get to 20, 30 years from now. So with that, hopefully I've given some people some things to think about. I'll look forward to the questions and the comments from the rest of my panel. So thank you.
Thank you, William. And our final speaker on the panel on transportation is Brad Mallory, Executive Deputy Secretary for Administration, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And you don't have to.
Good morning. Recently, we're doing some internal survey work in our department, and a productivity improvement team came to meet with me and sought my opinions on social media. And I demurred. I said, I'm not qualified. And they were somewhat taken aback, and I said, no one over 30 is qualified to speak on this subject, and you're wasting your time here. I was being a little facetious, but not much. And although there's a harder edge to this technology issue, I wonder if perhaps we'd be better off listening to the students in the audience rather than some of us. No disrespect intended to my fellow panelists, perhaps just better off than listening to me. There's little doubt that the development of shale gas in Pennsylvania and in the nation is a transforming event, and that's about where the agreement ends. There is obviously considerable disagreement on environmental impact, on social implications, on its ultimate utility. I will tell you candidly that although it's not my area of expertise, I fall on the side of those who believe it to be a relatively positive event. However, it's certainly something about which reasonable men and women may differ. I think there's perhaps less disagreement on the notion that ultimately the impact on energy prices is going to be relatively positive if you view energy prices decreasing as being positive, and I do. And we've already seen fairly dramatic impacts in places like Pennsylvania and in places and things like even utility costs, and we're very early in the curve on all that. And the interesting question is, and one that several of the panelists have posed quite well for you, are we going to see both environmental impacts and positive environmental benefits, I should say, and cost benefits from natural gas being used in vehicles? There's a fair amount of loose talk out and about in the community about replacing oil with gas, and I think we've already heard people here today suggesting that's probably not a very useful way of thinking about this, that in fact diversifying our fuel portfolio is certainly a better way of thinking about it, and that diversity is inherently, by definition, perhaps more sustainable than a sole source, which is almost the very definition of unsustainability. Natural gas, I think, is certainly a candidate for increased use in vehicles, particularly heavy-use vehicles, at least in the near term, but it's certainly not the only candidate. As has been pointed out, electric, hybrid, biofuels, fuel cells, and for that matter, just getting more out of what we have, are all clearly important avenues and roles we have to explore. But we're here to talk about natural gas in vehicles, so what does government do? There was a so-called Act 13 in Pennsylvania that recently dedicated some $20 million over 3 years for infrastructure, development of natural gas infrastructure, and conversion of the vehicle fleet. I will tell you that to my eye, and in fact because of the amount of effort and research, it appears to me that the private sector might be better suited to fulfilling the vast majority of the infrastructure investment role. And I will just simply say to you, I've been in both the public and private sectors, and I'm certainly not one of those people who bashes the public sector at all. But I will say that the business planning process is probably better suited to those decisions than the political process is on a good day. Conversion is perhaps a vehicle fleet conversion is perhaps a role where the government can play more of a role. We have a huge fleet at PennDOT, mostly limited use heavy vehicles that carry things, move things, and plow snow. And a relatively, for a very large organization, small number of light-duty vehicles. But the notion of government assisting in the aggregation of demand, that is, putting more demand in one place for any of these test bed technologies, I think is a pretty good one. For example, if in fact EQT establishes a fueling station, downtown, and we can help purchase 4 garbage trucks, well, that makes good sense. As a general rule, those heavy use vehicles that can carry the tanks, carry the weight, and can fuel slowly overnight are virtually ideal candidates. We're excited at the prospects because of our large heavy fleet. However, we tend to have a large heavy fleet that has to be ready to go at a moment's notice, and it has to refuel immediately. In the middle of a snowstorm, you don't take a piece of equipment out of duty for 4, 6, 5, any number of hours. Our goal, in fact, is to have something like 85% of our heavy equipment on the road at any one time in a heavy storm, and it takes a lot of doing to do that. So as the technology develops, and if in fact we see lighter fuel tanks, if we see more rapid fuel rates, I think we will see government being more interested in doing more with these vehicles. We have entered into a 13-state memorandum of understanding for the vehicle conversion process, and candidly, the results have been disappointing to date. There just hasn't been much traction. It is only now, and we're more than a year and a half or 2 years into this, that we're seeing some serious discussions and I think some serious potential for improvement in that regard. This is a situation which is rapidly evolving, to say the least. In general, government ought to help where it can and probably get out of the way where it can't. Clearly, there are always regulatory and safety concerns. I don't think those are by any means paramount or overwhelming here. I think they're very manageable. That's an important role, something that needs to be thought of. But I think government's principal successful role in this can be to help kind of further some options along, create a little more demand perhaps in the near term, try to match up the private sector fueling capacity that exists, and to some degree open the fence, so to speak, through cooperative agreements where it exists, and try to create a little more vehicle demand, and then see, which technologies, not which technology, but which technologies, plural, win the races, and end up being what we, ride into the future on, both literally and figuratively. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Brad. Okay, we've got quite a few questions here. Some are quite broad and at the policy level, and some are quite specific. So I'm going to start with a very specific question, and this is probably more for Ellen than anyone else, but please, if others know the answer to this, let me know. How many CNG stations exist around us right now that might be available for fueling? And how far can a CNG car run after each filling of the tank, or a bus?
What I understand right now, there is a slow fuel pump in the Strip District, which is not sufficient for ours. Again, remember, we need to fill our bus in 6 minutes, and we need to do 200 in the East Liberty garage overnight. So it's, the Strip District is not for us. What we are looking at is if the numbers drive this to a reasonable endeavor, then we would look at doing a fueling station sufficient to have a third party fill at times when we're not using it. Again, how do you afford the infrastructure to do this, and how can the private sector benefit while we benefit, lower our costs? In terms of, I wouldn't be the person to ask. A bus driver could tell you how long the natural gas bus would ride longer than. My understanding, it's 120% more on fuel. You need 20% more natural gas for every equivalent gallon of diesel.
Maybe I can help.
Yeah, you probably could help.
That's a very common question, right? How far can you go on a natural gas vehicle? And the way I answer it, well, it depends. It really depends on what your business is all about and what you need, because buses or trucks or vans, it's amount of how much storage you want to put on board and how much you want to occupy for real estate and mass and cost for that range requirement. So our vans, as an example, right, our full-size vans, we offer them in 3 and 4 tank configurations, 200 to 50, 350 miles of dedicated CNG. Pickup truck, we offer 17 gasoline gallon equivalent. So how much does 17 gasoline gallons equivalent get you in a pickup truck? But in a pickup truck, it's biofuel, so you have your complete gasoline system as well. So it is really about matching the vehicle with the customer to kind of come up with the right range requirements to bring them home to base or let them do their tour of duty and have enough access to refueling in the field.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mallory spoke, our last speaker, to the government role. Should it be to create more demand on the vehicle side, or should it be to help close gaps in infrastructure, or both? And others have spoken to this as well, but are there opinions about the appropriate role of government in encouraging greater use of natural gas than have been expressed so far? I guess not.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's opinions. I'll stick my neck out a little bit. I think the infrastructure side, in general, and I wouldn't just say this applies to natural gas. I mean, this could apply to any of the pathways that I talked about of figuring out how to make the private station owners, and people don't realize that over 90% of the stations are not owned by the energy companies, they're owned by small businesses with very small profit margins. So asking them to spend $1 million to build a gaseous fuel station is challenging, and they have to have the cash flow to do that. So that's potentially a role that government can play in terms of some tax policy there, and how do you ensure sort of 5 or 7 years of cash flow while the vehicle pool develops. Not sure about the investment on the vehicle side, and there has to be a consumer pull for that. So if you're going to pick and choose where the resources go, I would suggest more on the infrastructure side and way upstream on the basic and applied research. Honestly, question some of the value in a lot of the tech validation and demonstration money that is spent by government to on some of these advanced technologies.
Just to make sure the bill isn't out on its own and kind of stretching. I agree with what Bill says. It is about partnerships. It is about getting fleet customers to kind of know there are products out there, that there's infrastructure coming in an area, and that government certainly has a role in helping in the education process. The Clean Cities initiatives is an example of one where I see it being very helpful in bringing customers and OEMs and technology providers together to kind of find those markets where the first adopters are there, and there's a path that's there that's seen as being long-term and sustainable. So we encourage and we like that method of getting the message out there. Again, in research, I ditto those things. There are certain things when you're trying to invest in technology development and you're competing for lots of technology value streams internally and externally, it's sometimes hard to kind of get advance those cost challenges that you see in this technology if there aren't pathways to do that. Having said that, we're very excited about the APRI-E funding that is putting in some significant funding into looking at cost of onboard vehicle storage with some innovative technologies, as well as some investments in looking at next generation home refueling that might bring the cost of home refueling to a more affordable level. So there are some examples where the government is assisting in areas where, quite frankly, as an OEM, we can't solve that all on our own.
Okay, great. Is anybody thinking about dual fuel technologies where you might have vehicles that could operate on natural gas and something else?
Excuse me, that's very much part of our study in terms of the waterway. The configuration of the vessel itself limits the capacity to carry a lot of the liquid natural gas, and we think that dual fuel is certainly it's going to be part of our design feasibility study, and we suspect that's probably where the final answer is going to lie.
Maybe just a comment on definitions, biofuel versus dual fuel. Part of the complexity is, I spoke of our pickup truck, and we call it a biofuel system. It has two complete fuel systems. They're independent, but they have to work in unison. But only one fuel is consumed in the engine at one point in time. In the diesel space, there are technology providers that are dual fuel, that are substituting a portion of the diesel combustion through the ingestion of natural gas. So there are dual fuel solutions out there and biofuel solutions. But I would say that in general, you'll see the biofuels in the gasoline-based engine architectures and the dual fuels in the diesel architectures.
Okay. A couple of questions here relate to the emissions challenges of CNG vehicles. Ellen, you mentioned that your primary concern is carbon monoxide. Are there other emissions issues with natural gas that we need to be concerned about, and how can they be solved?
If I can just speak to our issue on carbon monoxide is the infrastructure that will be required to put in to make our, to be able to work on and run our vehicles in our garages. So it's a huge cost for us to retrofit a garages that are 40 years old, 30 years old, and therein is the question of, are we better off, and particularly since it's the East Liberty garage, if any of you are from this area know the East Liberty garage is, that whole area is under redevelopment with extraordinary projects including Google and others, and so it is prime property. So the question is, in looking at the overall cost, do we sell, buy new, and put that money into a new facility? So we're looking at all of that. But it's largely the carbon monoxide is what is driving that whole issue of retrofitting and our concerns about safety and making sure we do it right.
I would add that Federal and state EPAs have pretty clear and rigorous requirements in terms of criteria and non-criteria pollutants. So whether you're talking about gas, diesel, or natural gas, the vehicle is going to meet those. So there's some engineering challenges, but they'll occur. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think our real concern is sort of the methane leakage, which is more the environmental concern than the criteria pollutant concern, which in all new vehicles and those moving forward as the requirements get stricter are going to be extremely small, particularly relative to vehicles that are 20, 30 years old that they might be replacing.
So building on that, it is correct. The products we bring to market do meet the regulated emission requirements, and our products are certified to EPA and California emissions with complete OBD2 compliance and monitoring, right? So we know how to put the right technology on the vehicle to meet those kind of environmental expectations. We recognize that, that methane is one of those things that we need to think about on how to manage that long term at an overall systems level. And does the vehicle have a piece of that puzzle? Yes. Is there some opportunity in the research and development area to maybe look at advanced catalysts for methane reduction? Absolutely. Is it something that we need and are deploying in our products today? In some regions of the world, there are needs for that. But in general, though, the product is ready, and we can meet those emission requirements and those expectations that are on the books and as we see them in the future.
Okay, thank you. This is a question specifically for you, Jim. The questioner is wondering if you are thinking about the risks of transporting a highly explosive product through densely populated areas in a system that has serious problems with its locks and dams.
Happy to address it. Most of what we talk about is the use of it as a fuel, and it's no more hazardous on a towboat as a fuel than it is in an automobile, which also goes through heavily populated areas. The only other comment that it might be addressing is the use of the used frac water that I introduced, which is largely a saline product, and there is testing protocols to determine if there are hazards in there. It would be tested by whatever the Coast Guard requires, but that is why the Coast Guard needs to make that determination. And I think what I was trying to allude to is the Coast Guard probably could use some help, because I don't think they have the expertise of making the evaluation that needs to be done to do it. But from what I understand, we suspect it is not a highly flammable cargo that we're talking about. It's basically water.
Okay, there's a question about whether there is competition for use of natural gas between the chemical industry and the transportation sector, and whether there is a potential that prices might be driven up on one side or the other or both as a result of that competition, and if there's a role for public policy in that conversation.
Well, I guess that probably touches on something that I brought up, and maybe I could have done a better job of expressing that thought, but I think the answer is yes. Maybe this is my personal opinion, but to me, I can see why the suppliers and producers of natural gas want it to be used in transportation. Right? Prices are very sensitive in the margin, and if supply is fixed and you can increase the demand a little bit, you can generate a lot of additional profit. Now that's good for them, but it's not good for the other users in the petrochemical industry and for people for home heating and in the power sector. So, we can have an entire discussion on that relationship of supply and demand, but I think we do need to be very cognizant of the risks it poses about using it in other sectors, and what is the most efficient way to use it, and at what rate, and balancing that supply and demand.
That said, you kind of look at where natural gas is used today, and I think if you were to aggregate it up, I think it's less than 5% of it is used in transportation today. So the question then becomes, what would that outlook look like, and how much would that have as an impact? Right.
And the count, that's a fair point, and people want to point to low percentages. But let's look at what happens when we have a 1% disruption in oil supply. It is not a 1% price and change. It's a 10% or greater price impact at the pump. So we can talk about small percentages in transportation, but we have to be cognizant that it could lead to an order of magnitude higher price change or disruption across the entire commodity supply chain. And I don't quote me on exact numbers, but it's not a linear relationship, and that's the key point to make.
And that's why it's so complex, right? It's so complex to kind of predict or to know where best to place our technology and place our solutions. So it's really about the dialogues and the societal priorities we place on these various commodities that we have and these various options that we have. And that's why we look at these solutions not only in the context of the United States, but in context of the other markets in which we design and build. So it's not an easy one.
Okay. So this is probably not a fair question, but it's kind of an interesting question. If we had to choose one of these transportation sectors to invest in, trucks, buses, boats, trains, cars, only one of those, what would be the most beneficial for society to invest in? Can anybody answer that?
Is that within the context of natural gas or okay?
Natural gas.
Okay.
I won't volunteer buses. I'll wait a few years.
I have trouble understanding why we would have to choose between the modes, and specifically what we're looking at is nexus opportunities where trucking and barging come together, and I would like to actually go back to the question earlier about the frack water. We're transporting in trucks through heavily populated areas today.
Right, exactly.
Nobody seems to be concerned about that. But I don't think that there's any reason to choose myself.
Okay, so synergy is important.
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to many market segments can take advantage of this fuel. It could be large trucks, it can be garbage trucks, buses, light-duty vehicles, but all of it has to be aggregated around a certain level of infrastructure that make that infrastructure sustainable for those fleets that are going to rely on it. Because without that, as Joe says, that independent operator who's invested in the station is looking for throughput, is looking for enough vehicles and gallons pumped to make it work for them. In the context of the retail consumer, there's some research that suggests you might need to have about 20% of the infrastructure having CNG available for it to be transparent to you and I as an individual consumer. That's can be done, but it requires some significant investments, and it might be in some areas that the early adopters are likely to see it first.
I'll qualify this as my opinions on this are because I really believe that we need to focus on some long-term strategies, and so my answer would probably be the commercial truck diesel replacement, and for a couple reasons. One, there aren't a lot of alternatives to diesel available right now. There are alternatives to the use of gasoline in the light-duty segment, whether it's efficiency through hybridization or what we're seeing with some of the biofuels and what's coming down the stream. And I am concerned about that lock-in effect. I want to make sure that we continue on a pathway that ultimately reduces our energy consumption and our environmental footprint over a 30 to 50-year time frame. And I think if you explicitly invest in things like CNG today, we could undermine those pathways. I'm less concerned about that happening if we do it on the diesel and commercial vehicle side, which I also think will have a better and more important economic impact near term as well, which ultimately is what we're all talking about. Energy security, climate security, it's really about economic security.
And that's really why we're watching very closely, our fleet customers who have often very much a diesel portfolio, and can we offer them something that is kind of in line with what they're may be doing anyway, is looking at diesel alternatives and then looking at the rest of their fleet, and does it make business sense for them to consider that on natural gas as well. So I agree, it is commercial is where we see our focus, and it is those diesel customers that are first coming to us through the big fleets and even the smaller fleets that are saying, is there another choice?
Okay, great. We've talked a lot about infrastructure. Most of what I've heard relates to refueling stations. I have a question here about whether there is a bottleneck or some gap in the infrastructure related to getting the gas to the refueling stations to begin with. Do we have enough pipelines? Is there enough sort of connecting production to the end distribution point?
No.
Could you talk about that a little bit?
All right. I probably don't need to tell a lot of the people in the room the way our pipeline system works in this country. And it's been built to deal with petroleum. So it flows from the south, north, a lot of it. Where we're seeing these resources are different locations. So we do need an entirely new pipeline infrastructure in many, many regions. But at the local level, a lot of homes, think about how many people here have natural gas in their homes and how many don't. And that's typically indicative of what you have, within a community. And it's not easy to just go and install that. So, even if we believed, and making no value judgment as to whether it's correct or not, that we should have ubiquitous natural gas for vehicles, we'd still have a big challenge in bringing it into a lot of communities, unless we were doing it through sort of less efficient ways of liquefying it and then recompressing it, which is, I don't think, the solution we want to go with. So, yes, there's a challenge.
Okay, are there any other questions out there that people can write on cards? Because I'm running out of questions. I've got a couple more, but we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left, so like to see some additional questions. So this question asked whether the conversion of natural gas to transportation liquid fuels such as gasoline, methanol, to transport liquid fuels such as gasoline, methanol, or diesel is economically viable at current natural gas versus gasoline diesel pricing? And what is the environmental impact and regulation of using natural gas to transport liquid fuels?
Can you repeat that?
I don't know that I necessarily understand the question myself, but I'll read it again. Is the conversion of natural gas to transport liquid fuels, such as gasoline, methanol, or diesel, economically viable at current natural gas versus gasoline and diesel pricing?
Okay.
We're not talking about the transportation. It's converting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it converting gas to liquid? Is that what the questioner is asking?
I'm certainly not in a position to comment on whether that is. I would say that was touched on in that NPC study that I referred to, where they did look at the various ways of using natural gas as a feedstock in transportation pathways, including gas to liquids. But I can't recall offhand what came out of that.
Can we bring the first panel back up to answer that? The challenge is, the point I'll address in that question is the time frame, that constraint that was put on there today. And that's, that's really not the issue. Is does it make sense over the entire amortization of the capital expenditure needed to build these facilities? And the uncertainty over these 20 to 30-year timeframes is what's precluded a lot of that investment today, and will probably realistically, not speaking for the petrochemical or energy companies, probably limit some of their investment. Now, methanol is produced today, and it's a fungible material. And I want to caution, I am in no way suggesting M85 vehicles. Maybe low percent of 2 or 3% could be interchanged with gasoline. The economics potentially there may work. We're hearing some things that gas to liquid may work, but until you address the long-term uncertainty over the price, you're not going to see billion-dollar investments being made. At least I wouldn't, if it were my money.
I think T. Boone Pickens referred to that as converting platinum to gold. But that may tell you more about T. Boone Pickens than investment.
Okay, we're getting some interesting questions now about specific vehicles. So for the GM and Toyota folks, when are you going to introduce fuel cell vehicles? Some of your competitors have announced for next year or the year after.
We announced about 10 years ago we would bring them in 2015, and we're going to meet our commitment to do that. And the numbers I'm seeing are changing, but we are still committed to bringing them out as an early production vehicle in 2015. A lot of it will go to where the ZEV states are, so California, where they also have some infrastructure. Beyond that, we have a fixed quantity sort of in that 2015 to 2020 timeframe that we want to look to sell. After that, we'll bring the next generation vehicle out, and with hopefully continued improvement and lower costs, and we'll see where it goes from there. There's no guarantees because there has to be some market acceptance, but that's where we are, and it'll be a passenger sedan. It'll compressed hydrogen, 10,000 psi. Yeah, and there are a number of hydrogen fueling stations. I mean, we'll need more and to really get the support that's out there, but you can go online and find where they are now. And this is a case where actually clustering has some advantages because you do need critical mass of the infrastructure. A very different rollout strategy, I think, than what we would argue is necessary for electric vehicles.
Certainly, from a GM perspective, we've learned a tremendous amount through the Project Driveway initiative that hopefully most of you have heard about, where we deployed some 100 fuel cell vehicles, in various test markets. And we've taken a lot of that learning and put that into our next generation fuel cell technology. We're certainly, we've stepped back a little bit and looked at all the challenges that we're facing globally in our portfolio and in kind of the fuel economy and CO2 emission challenges that I've indicated. And quite frankly, we've had to look at our engineering resources and our engineering priorities, and we're continuing to invest in fuel cell technology. What we have done recently is we've consolidated a lot of our engineering activity that was scattered across many centers in the United States and brought them all to Pontiac, Michigan, to begin the economies of scale of when you start consolidating your engineering resources into one location. But at this point, I'm not in a position to commit that we've announced production plans at this point, but we are continuing to invest in the learnings we got in the first program and putting that into some demonstration vehicles that we're deploying currently in the state of Hawaii.
Okay, now this question makes an assertion that I don't know to be true, so you'll have to tell me if it's not true or address the question if you can. How come the third world uses so much natural gas for transportation? Is that really true that the third world does, and what is the reason for that?
All right, I'll take the first cut, then I'll turn it over to my colleague who's also a global manufacturer. This comes down to, I mean, if you look at countries like Pakistan and Iran and some other countries where this is the case, yes, there's a high degree of natural gas use in transportation. And the conditions there are different in almost every metric than they are in the US. First is government policy. Hugely different policy in terms of tax policy and price controls on the fuel. There's resource issues, there's the way the vehicles are used and the energy demands. There's the types of vehicles that are used. A lot of them are old used vehicles that are the government subsidizes the retrofit on. So it's nice to point to that. We struggle to see how those lessons can carry over or apply to the U.S. market, which even compared to a lot of other OECD countries and Europe is its own unique animal and in regards to how vehicle and energy demand it exists and tax policy.
And building on that, it's kind of what industry and societal standards, code standards and regulations are in play. There's definitely some challenges in the way some of that deployment is currently going on, and certainly some of those solutions couldn't easily be transferred to North America. You know, I don't think that would be something that we would do. Some of those markets we as a company don't sell in, and that's just a business decision that we've made that we're not in that market. But we also see in some of those markets that the consumer is looking for any form of transportation, and with some government policy, that becomes a form that's readily available to them, and so they gravitate to it because it's the one that's there in their backyard. There are some technical compromises that they're accepting, maybe longer fill times, operational limitations, range issues, things that might be more important here than in other regions, and so that does tend to create use of the fuel, but for different priorities, for different business interests.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks to all of you who submitted questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, especially the later ones, but I really appreciate your interest, and please help me thank again our panel.